אותה אבקש. שבתי בבית השם כל ימי חיי, לחזות בנועם עד השם ולבקר בהיכלו, לחזות בנועם עד השם ולבקר בהיכלו. Welcome, everyone. It's so exciting to start this series with you. I've been really looking forward to it. I'm going to just begin. I'm going to continually, for the next little bit, people join. I'm going to be adding the source sheet to the chat. So feel free to download that if you haven't already. We won't be needing it for the first couple of minutes, but just so that you can be set up. It's really, really lovely to see your faces. And I look forward, hopefully, to also hearing your voices and discussion as we move forward. But just in the beginning, I'm going to just give some introductory remarks about what I'm hoping we're going to be doing together this morning, and for those of you who continue the journey for the next 5 weeks as we go through Elul and even go into the 10 days of Tshuva. So I'm really going to start by defining what this class is. Oh, and one note, they asked me to record this class. So for anyone who would rather, I'm going to make sure it's in, well, you know what? I'm going to, for now, keep it on everyone's gallery view. And so if you'd prefer not to have your face on camera, do feel free to be off camera. And also, private chat me if this is a privacy issue for you, and I will talk with the powers that be about whether we record the next session or not. Okay, defining the terms of the title, this long title, hitbodedut and Prayer Heroes of the Chagim. One phrase at a time. Hitbodedut is a spiritual practice. Now we have this word in the rabbinic era, and it generally corresponds to meditation or to seclusion, to being by yourself. It literally means to make yourself by yourself, to be alone, right? But to do it in a self-reflexive way, meaning an intentional way, right? I'm doing this for or to myself. And in, as I said, the rabbinic world, it's generally now defined as meditation. But of course, we have no idea what that means to them, right? We don't have specific meditation instructions from the rabbinic world. And so it's unclear what their idea of hitbodedut is. But hitbodedut was developed as a practice, most famously by Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav, the great Hasidic teacher from the late 18th century. And I'm going to be defining more what this practice is in the second half of our class. But to just let you know that my intention is that we're not only learning together, but that there will be a practice component for anyone who wants to engage it, where we're going to be experimenting with this practice of hitbodedut. Now, the only thing I'm going to say now about it is that really it's about doing something that's very simple, but not easy, which is opening your heart and speaking the truth of what's happening to you. Generally, to an audience of God, or however you define the other, capital O, that you're speaking to. And so we'll talk more about how to do that. But I wanted to say that much because it helps us with the second half of the title, Prayer Heroes of the Chagim. So the Chagim are this wonderful period of holidays in the fall, culminating in Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, where we really get to restart our lives intentionally. And I'm focusing particularly on the prayer heroes of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Those are the ones that I'm planning to highlight. But to make them a prayer hero of the Chagim for our purposes, each of these figures from the Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur liturgy, figures who are featured in the prayers that we already say, or in the Torah readings, or Haftorah readings that we already say, each of these takes a moment to open their hearts and speak directly from the heart to the Holy One. So they are going to be our dugmaot, our examples, our models of how this is done. That is sort of the method behind my madness. We're going to learn and look at people who speak to God directly in our own exploration of how to personally do that. Okay, so any questions at this point? Feel free to raise a human hand or a participant hand in the participant column. Okay, I'm going to plow forward since our time is short. But feel free to ask questions at any point. I'll attempt to monitor the chat. And again, I'm just going to, at this point, repost the sources for anyone who's joined us. Feel free to open that Google Doc. Also, if you would like to get the sources to print out ahead of time, feel free to, if you've already registered, I think you must have, to get this link, then you will naturally get the sources before our next class. So you can print them out ahead of time. So the first thing I'm going to do right now is actually invite you to our first prayer hero, who is King David. And I picked King David because I really wanted to both look at his story slightly and how he called out to God in two places. One, because we're still in the month of Elul, and Psalm 27 defines this period for me. It's a psalm that's said traditionally twice a day, from the beginning of the month all through the entire Tshuva series and Tshuva season. And many of you heard me talk about my love and my connection and my interest in this psalm. But today, what I'd like to do is just simply, I'm going to read through it for you. I'm going to read through it in translation. And I'm going to ask that you do one of the following as I read through, because I'm actually going to read through it twice. The first time I read through it, I'd like you to simply, if you have a pen or a highlighter and you've printed it out, highlight or underline phrases that are resonant, that can include difficult, right, or meaningful to you in some way. And if you don't have it printed out and you have a piece of paper, then just simply write down words or phrases as they come to you. Okay? And again, I'm just going to be reading the translation with you right now. Okay, any questions about that before I start reading? Okay, here we go. And the reason this is, I'm attributing this to David is because it begins Lid David, or for David, or of David. The whole Psalm collection, all 150 Psalms, are traditionally attributed to David, which we know he did not write all of them. They're attributed to other people by name throughout. But this one we're going to, for our purposes this morning, we're going to imagine David speaking these words because they begin with direct address to God from David. And one other note on this translation is from the Lev Sholem. However, I have followed Norman Fisher's wise guidance, and just instead of using words or names for God, I have just changed it to you, which also serves our purpose of direct address to God. Of David, you are my light and my salvation. Whom should I fear? You are the stronghold of my life. Of whom should I be afraid? When evildoers approach me to devour my flesh, my own foes and enemies, it's they who stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart would have no fear. Though war arise against me, still would I be confident. One thing I ask of you, that's what I seek, to dwell in your house all the days of my life, to behold your beauty, to be a regular in your sanctuary. You will hide me in your pavilion on an evil day, conceal me in the concealment of your tent, raise me high upon a rock. Now is my head raised above my enemies round about me. I sacrifice in your tent with shouts of joy. I sing and chant hymns to you. Hear my voice, I call. Have mercy on me and answer me. On your behalf, my heart says, seek my face. Your face I seek. Do not conceal your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You are my help. Do not abandon me. Do not forsake me. You are my salvation. Though my father and mother forsake me, you will take me in. Show me your way and lead me on a level path because of my watchful enemies. Do not subject me to the will of my foes, for false witnesses have arisen against me, breathing out violence. Were I not to believe that I would see your goodness in the land of the living, gather to you, strengthen and give courage to our hearts, and gather to you. Okay. Whew, I love that psalm. I'm going to read it again now. And this time, if you do feel comfortable having your camera on, I would love for you to just have it on for this piece. Because what we're going to do is just simply where you wrote down words or highlighted or underlined, I'm going to read through again, and we're just going to get to see collectively what was moving to folks. So I'm just going to ask you to physically just make a gesture when I'm reading and when something that you underlined or highlighted came up. My print is a little small, so I may take off my glasses for this part, but I'll be looking at, I can still see your hands. You are my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? You are the stronghold of my life. Of whom should I be afraid? When evildoers approach me to devour my flesh, my own foes and enemies, it is they who stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart would have no fear. Though war arise against me, still I would be confident. One thing I ask of you, this is what I seek, to dwell in your house all the days of my life, to behold your beauty, to be a regular in your sanctuary. You will hide me in your pavilion on an evil day, conceal me in the concealment of your tent, raise me high upon a rock. Now is my head raised above my enemies round about me. I sacrifice in your tent with shouts of joy. I sing and chant hymns to you. Hear my voice, I call. Have mercy on me and answer me. On your behalf, my heart says, seek my face. Your face I seek. Do not conceal your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You are my help. Do not abandon me. Do not forsake me. You are my salvation. Though my father and mother forsake me, you will take me in. Show me your way and lead me on a level path because of my watchful enemies. Do not subject me to the will of my foes, for false witnesses have arisen against me, breathing out violence. Were I not to believe that I would see your goodness in the land of the living, gather to you, strengthen and give courage to our hearts. Gather to you. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for participating in that. That was useful just to see what's resonant. Does anybody want to share any thoughts on what you heard in this psalm, either in general or sort of in specific to our theme about what you notice about what opening up and speaking directly to God can look like? Feel free to unmute and say something, or if you have a thought you want to put in the chat.
Hey, I'll speak. When I read this, I mean, I just see this motion from, confidence to kind of like a real stripping down. And I just feel like there's kind of a pivot in the middle of the psalm when, you really get to the truth of what's being said, that I'm actually, kind of maybe what's the beginning is very external, but what's really inside me is I'm freaked out,
Yes.
And then I guess, I think like for me, the thing that really resonates, well, I think though my father and mother forsake me, I mean, I feel like that's kind of the ultimate of being alone in this world in a certain way. And then just the ending, when you're asking, really what you're asking is for courage. It's like you're not asking for anything except to be able to endure whatever is coming ahead,
Yeah.
And that's, I just feel like that's really true. That's really what life is like. All you can do is be brave. So I find it the ending very strong for me.
Thank you, Catherine. I couldn't agree more with your reflections. And I just want to point out textually that what you say about that middle section, the way that I read the translation, elided this fact. But actually, in the beginning of the psalm, the psalmist is still talking sort of to God in the third person, like it's saying it all in the first person. You're my this and you're my that, but it's still calling God, right? But right there in the middle, in verse 8, it says Lecha Amar Libi. bakshu, right? And that's where it changes to the personal. To you, my heart says, it's actually a very strange Hebrew here. My heart says, turn to you. It's look for you. It's this very ambiguous change where the heart is turning somehow and seeking and speaking at the same time to God. And that really is such a beautiful encapsulation of what happens when we take our hearts off road, off Sidor, and we turn in second person to you. Then all of a sudden, the real stuff comes out. The real stuff sometimes comes out. And even if it's somewhat true that we have faith and confidence, we get to see here that coexisting with all of those things are a feeling of loneliness and abandonment and doubt. And so, yeah, I agree. And I really, I agree with you that the last line I often see and talk about as a practice instruction. It's like, okay, so all this is as it is, but I like to look at the word kaveh, which can be wait or hope. It's often translated, but I like to translate it as gather, like mikvah. It's also the word that's the root for mikvah, right? Which is gathered waters. Just gather all these parts of me, all of it, right? And I'm offering it to you. Just help me gather all of that to you and keep strengthening my heart and making it brave to face all of this. And then I'll just keep gathering it to you, right? Just the practice instruction, like I'm going to keep practicing and offering it all up to you. That's what I've got. So thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, Judah.
So, we've all read this many times, but this was an interesting exercise to see which words jumped out. And the words that I wrote down were fear, hide, conceal, sacrifice. And those aren't really, heartwarming words. But then the last word that I wrote down was level path. And I found that so interesting because, the previous words I said do not lead to a level path.
Right.
And so this is where the connection with hitbodedut may be, is that despite all these things, that we can go on a level path with God's help.
Beautiful comment, Judah. And I'm going to read it along with Rebecca's comment. The part that really stands out to me is in verse 4, all the days of my life and a regular in your sanctuary. Everything else feels like it relates to circumstance, to difficulty, but there's this one specific mention of a need for something constantly and consistently, regardless of circumstance. That reminds me of the mishor, right? That Judah's talking about, the level path. And I really do think that in a sense, that maybe that's a suggestion for us, again, that in the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that we can't control, the thing that we can control is our spiritual practice, how we show up every day for minyan, or for saying this psalm, or for meditation, or for, in our case, for those of you who choose to engage it, for hitbodedut practice, and to see how that practice actually lets us both feel the highs and the lows, but whether it in itself, if we engage in it regularly at a regular time, in a regular way, becomes a level field, becomes in itself consistency, constancy, all the days of my life, being a regular in your sanctuary. So it's wonderful that you pulled those out. Those, I think, exactly relevant to what we're trying to do in a practice sense. Yeah, Stuart.
As Judah pointed out, and as probably many other people see, there are a lot of ideas and language used in this that just are not consistent with 21st century values. I mean, it's difficult to relate to the metaphors that are used here. But one of them seems to be very discordant with your introduction.
Yeah.
Talking about this as a process of being alone and finding God, not in the group. And the implication would be you're not going to find God in the sanctuary either, because you're not going to be the only person in the sanctuary. So I find that a little as a discordant note, and obviously the reference to being close to God, and sacrificing a bull at the same time, to me, ain't gonna happen. It's just not gonna happen.
Beautiful comment, Stuart, and so appropriate and meaningful for exactly now, for exactly this time, right? Because the truth is, our sanctuaries are empty, right? And we're meeting in Zoom rooms, but a lot of what we're doing in rooms by ourselves. And so I think that there's an extra poignancy to your remark, and maybe an extra poignancy to this practice, right? Because this is something where we won't miss people. And one thing I'll just say is, it is true that this is, Rebbe Nachman didn't come till the 18th century, right? And so this was a Hasidic recovery, elucidation of earlier practices that were done, but it is something that's not going back explicitly to the ancient roots, right? And to the communal roots. And to your point about where it's happening, I'll say more about this when we get to hitbodedut practice. But he recommended, if you could, to do it outside, right? The opposite of being in shul. But I still want to open it up to what David could possibly mean by in your sanctuary, right? Because the sanctuary wasn't built by David. It was built by his son, right? Shlomo. And so, yes, there were, mikdashim, right? There were Shiloh, there were places to go, but maybe we can think of your sanctuary, right, as the place we call to you, even outside. But it's an excellent point. Okay, Jeannie's going to get the last word, because then we're going to move on. Yeah.
Well, I was interested in the word dwell, and I kept coming back to it. And I'd like to know what that actually is in Hebrew, because for me it involves a very active being in a space, as opposed to just was or lived in, or there, I don't know. So I'm interested to know what that actually was in Hebrew, what the root was.
Well, I'm excited. Every single person who's asked a question, it's like I planted you. Like each one of you have brought out an aspect that we should actually be totally paying attention to for the purpose of our practice instructions. So the word is shivti, right? Is to dwell. But I typed it into the chat in the Hebrew because I wanted to show you that, like, shivti is also like Shabbat, right? A rest. But if you move the letter around, if you move that taf around, it's the same root as tshuva, right? And so there's this idea of like returning and dwelling as part of this experience. And you'll notice when you engage in this hitbodedut practice, if you choose to do that, that often you find yourself returning to the same ideas, right? And having to start over. And dwelling might be sort of a static thing, or it might be this constant dynamic of starting and returning, which is, of course, tshuva itself. Okay, wonderful. I wanted to just look at one other piece of David's story. And I had hoped to do it in Chavruta, but I think for this first day, because I want to make sure we leave time for questions on the practice. Well, you know what? I think I'm going to give you a short Chavruta. Let me just set the scene. For those of you with the texts, either in front of you or in the chat, I'm going to just repost that one more time so it's very available for everyone. We're on page 2. We're in 2 Samuel. And I'm just going to summarize the first 2 long paragraphs, and we're just going to do the final 3 paragraphs on the page in Chavruta. And what I'd like to do in my summary is just say that this is the famous story where also popularized by the Hebrew poet of the season of Tshuva, Leonard Cohen, right? Who wrote many, many different things about Tshuva in this time of year. So David is on the roof, maybe doing hitbodedut, right? And gets distracted by this beautiful woman bathing, Bathsheba, and then engages in highly questionable behavior, i.e. sin, and basically ultimately commissioning that her husband be killed, be put on the front line so that he gets out of the way and David can be with Bathsheba. So this is wrong. It's nice to see that leaders have limits, and this is said very clearly that even David, who is beloved of God, did something really, really wrong. And the prophet Nathan is sent to David to explain to David that he's done really wrong and that he's going to be punished. And Nathan gives this beautiful analogy of a poor man who only has one sheep, and he loves his sheep, and his sheep is his best friend, and he takes care of the sheep, and how a rich man who has flocks and flocks and flocks sees the poor man's sheep, decides he wants it, and takes it, right? And so David is outraged from this story, and Nathan goes like, "That's you, buddy," right? And then we pick it up with David's words to Nathan, the prophet, on verse 13 through verse 20. So we're going to see the rest of that passage, how David responds in the moment to hearing and understanding that he's done wrong, from his confession through the punishment. Okay, so I'm going to put you into breakout rooms of 3 to 4 people. And we're just going to do this really fast. You're just going to basically have time to read through it and just comment about, whatever strikes you about this and whatever questions you have about it. All right, we'll take about 6 minutes.